take that one.
It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. With me today, Conservative MP Jake Berry, Labour peer Baroness Kennedy, journalist and author Paris Lees, and GB News presenter Inaya Folarin Iman. Today, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss makes her pitch for the top job.
I can lead, I can make tough decisions, and I can get things done.
6 candidates remain, with the next round of voting underway. But is the competition getting nasty?
I have worked with Penny. To be honest, I'm quite surprised that she is where she is.
If you're running for an office like this, it is fair that those who know you express views, and some of them are going to be nice and some of them less so.
Also today,
I'm a woman. I am biologically a woman.
why does the gender debate keep coming up in this contest? And should members of the Welsh Parliament be able to work remotely? Well, let's start with a story today from the BBC News website. Take a look at this headline. It says, Online safety bill put on hold until new Prime Minister is in place. Now, this is, of course, legislation that was going through Parliament, plans that the government introduced to try and limit the amount of abuse and harmful content on the internet. But that's been paused while the Conservative leadership contest takes place until there is a new Prime Minister. That certainly pleased one of the contenders. Take a look at this tweet from Kemi Badenoch. This is her response to the news that has been paused. It says, this would be the right move. The bill is in no fit state to become law. If I'm elected Prime Minister, I will ensure the bill doesn't overreach. We should not be legislating for hurt feelings. Inaya, is Kemi Badenoch right?
I think she's absolutely right. I think, quite frankly, it should be scrapped. I think it is a myth that the internet is this Wild West where anything goes.
And there's a lot of harmful content
actually,
online.
What we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic was big tech companies such as Facebook and Twitter actually censoring anything that contravened WHO viewpoints on COVID-19 mitigation in the government. Actually, consistently, people are removed, censored off of Twitter for often engaging in important public debate. I think the real problem is public life, where you have, for example, deputy leaders calling people scum in the House. I think that we need to deal with the problem of political polarisation in real life rather than having a technocratic solution, thinking you can solve it by regulating.
So, in a word, you want this scrapped?
Yes.
Paris?
Well, I mean, I think that I would agree with you that it's about how we talk to each other in public life, and I think that there's been this degradation of and just what happened to British manners. Where's that gone? But, you know, I think the idea that the internet's fine as it is ridiculous. I mean, look at the abuse that Marcus Rashford's had, you know.
The footballer, of course.
The footballer Marcus Rashford. You know, as a trans woman, I get abuse online every day. You know, I don't use social media for that reason very much. You know, Munro Bergdorf, the model and presenter, she's left. Sean Fay, any trans woman with a public profile feels that this is a really toxic space. It's not a safe space for women. It's not a safe space for gay people. And it's not about being offended. It's about the fact that we've got this medium that allows people to bully people to the point where they want to kill themselves.
This legislation you would support?
I haven't actually read the bill, so I don't want to say if it's perfect. And, you know, maybe there are some issues about, are we still allowed to criticise the government? I'd want to know that. But, yes, I do think we need to do something about the culture of bullying in this country. It's out of control. You couldn't do that before.
Well, this bill has proved contentious. I mean, take a look at the response from Nadine Dorries, of course, the Culture Secretary, who replied to Kemi Badenoch's tweet saying, which part of the bill legislates for hurt feelings, Kemi? So this is quite clearly causing some splits in your own party, Jake.
Yeah, it's quite a controversial piece of legislation. I actually think the government's done the right thing by pausing it. It is controversial. It seems to me that if we have a new Prime Minister, that they should look at this. It is paused rather than cancelled. I would be, frankly, amazed if a new Prime Minister, except for Kemi maybe, doesn't pick this up and get on with it. And the reason it's important is it's not about legislating for hurt feelings. There's criminal activity, death threats against people, threats of sexual... Let me finish, please. Threats of sexual violence. And, you know, I don't think people should be allowed to hide criminal activity behind a screen of anonymity on the internet. And that's why I think it's right that the government legislates in this space. Is this perfect? Do we need to look again? I suspect yes.
Let me let Helena come in and I'll come back to you, Anaya. Helena, where are you?
I'm very clear about this. First of all, there's a large part of this bill which is about children and the whole business of protecting children online, which is a very serious issue, and to be dismissing this bill as scrapping it is a nonsense, and it tells you something about the failure to really understand the problems there are about protecting children online. The second thing is, we're not talking about trivial hurt feelings here. We're talking about really incredible abuse, and the disinhibition that people feel online, that they can say things that they wouldn't dream of normally saying in somebody's living room, is absolutely shocking. What women experience particularly, what trans people experience, what homosexuals, people of colour experience. And this is not trivial. This is not about, I feel hurt. This is about people feeling that they can't go out, and also threats to rape and invoking rape, saying somebody should come and rape you. That inhibits women's lives.
Again, so I think that we need to understand the law as it already is. There's already the Malicious Communications Act. There's also laws against hate speech and so on. There's a lot of criminal behaviour is already covered when it comes to legislation. What the problem is that many civil liberties organisations, including Big Brother Watch and many, talk about legal but harmful, and they worry that that vague definition of harmful can include just effectively views that some people might find offensive. And we do have a problem in this country with freedom of speech, where people that if you disagree with them, they don't just want to say, OK, I respect your opinion. They want you removed and censored off the internet. And I think that's what people are fearful of.
That quite a lot of that legislation, you're absolutely right, is in place, is historic. You know, we live in an ever-changing world. I personally don't think it's kept pace with the sort of immediacy of things like Twitter and Facebook and things like that. And I'm sure many people on the, you know, I have been subject to multiple death threats and death threats against my family on social media, and it's deeply, deeply distressing. And I do think it's not about protecting politicians where big boys and girls and people in public life can speak up for themselves. We have a platform, but it is about protecting people from that sort of fear that just gets into every part of your family. And I think that's why it's right that we pause this, but look at it again immediately.
OK, well, it has been paused, not cancelled. It's been paused until, of course, we have an outcome from the Conservative leadership race. So let's talk about that now. There really is only one face on the front page of many of the newspapers today. Take a look at some of these. This is the headline in the Daily Express. It's hotting up. Mordaunt surges in race for number 10. And that is not the only paper to carry that picture of Penny Mordaunt on the front page. Surge for Mordaunt in race to be Tory leader is how the Times covers it. Penny Mordaunt, of course, a trade minister. And finally, the Eye. Mordaunt surge rattles rivals in race for number 10. And so today what we have heard are some people talking about Penny Mordaunt, and not always in the most favourable terms. Have a listen to this from David Frost, who was once a Brexit minister.
I have worked with Penny. To be honest, I'm quite surprised that she is where she is in this leadership race. She was my deputy, notionally more than really, I think, in the Brexit talks last year. I'm sorry to say this, that I felt she did not master the detail that was necessary in the negotiations last year. She wouldn't always deliver tough messages to the European Union when that was necessary, and I'm afraid she wasn't sort of fully accountable. She wasn't always visible.
Lord Frost talking about his Conservative colleague, Penny Mordaunt. Well, Liz Truss was asked about this when she launched her leadership campaign today. Let's have a little listen to what she had to say.
I haven't worked in the same department as Penny Mordaunt, and I certainly won't be making any disparaging comments about any of my fellow candidates. I think, in fact, the Conservative race shows what a broad range of talent we have in the Conservative Party.
Jake, what do you make of what Lord Frost said? It's all getting a bit nasty, isn't it?
Well, I think it's very unfortunate. I've got a lot of time for Lord Frost, but I do think that is unnecessary. I think what we're seeing in this leadership election is it's a sort of embarrassment of riches. We have 6, I believe, fantastic candidates. I'm backing Tom Tugendhat.
They don't all believe each other are fantastic.
I want a clean start for Britain. I also think that actually when we get to the TV debates, which I'm very keen to get Tom on, there's the possibility of turning this election on its head. I know Tom will absolutely shine. But I also want to see Penny on those debates, because I want to know more about what Penny stands for, what she will do if she's our Prime Minister, and ditto Rishi and all the other candidates. I don't think we've heard enough from Penny for people to really make their mind up. I don't agree with what Lord Frost says. You know, on Tom's campaign, You know, we are talking positively about policies, not individuals. We're talking about the future of our country. I'm not going to get into trash talking any of my colleagues, so you know, I don't think anyone else should actually.
Tom Tugendhat was asked about this as well, and he effectively said, "Look, it's fair game because this is a big job, and we're all being interviewed for it."
Yeah, you know, I think it is right to focus on what people's policies are, what their vision are for the future of the country. That is absolutely fair game. I'm just not sure that Lord Frost's intervention, someone I've got a lot of time for, regarded as, you know, someone who's a real star of the Conservative Party. I'm just not sure that was helpful at this juncture.
Helena, is there an argument that you could put that says because this contest feels like it's wide open, really, in a way that perhaps other leadership contests haven't, there's more at stake, and that's why we're getting some of this?
Listen, it's a snake pit because we're dealing with a crowd of people who are ruthless in their pursuit of power. And let's be very clear, Lord Frost, I mean, you just saw, if a woman was saying that, she'd be called a bitch. And we saw the most incredible display of bitchiness coming from a man. And I thought it was disgraceful to speak about a woman candidate in that way, dismissive of her role and how she really was a nothing. She was called a minister but wasn't functioning properly. This is a man who is incapable of negotiating properly with Europe. And as far as I'm concerned, it was great to see the back of him, but he's going to come back, you can be sure.
Okay.
And he's manoeuvring to get a job too. So let's be very clear.
Okay.
Not from Penny, I would guess. He's
No.
ruled himself out.
Inaya, what do you make of that?
I think making this about gender is completely ridiculous. When Suella Braverman announced that she was going to be standing, you had the Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry, calling her a deluded fantasist. So I think that, you know, when we're talking about statements and being disparaging towards candidates, I think it has happened across party. But I don't think that what Lord Frost has said has been particularly controversial. I mean, he is widely regarded as a principled Brexiteer, and I think when you have one of the most consequential jobs, interviews in the country, I think candidates should rightly come under significant scrutiny about their record. And I think Penny Mordaunt, who many people did not know about, I think it's right to find out that when she has had positions, what has she done? And this is not the only time that people have asked serious questions about her flip-flopping, whether or not she can deliver. We may come on to the trans issue, but Brexit is one of those important issues.
Before you, I'm so sorry. I just want to apologise to our audience for some language that Helena used. I understand it was used in a passionate moment, but it is language that we should apologise for viewers who may be younger or offended by it.
A woman would be
on
called
lunchtime
a bitch if she used that language, and
no,
that is
can we
what
not use that
happens.
language anymore because it is daytime television and we have to be conscious of our audience. But thank you, Paris. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, they're not being very nice, are they? Penny Mordaunt's making jokes about trans people and talking about how she's a woman without a willy. Ha ha ha, you know. So this is what we're dealing with. Things have become incredibly toxic. But I actually, you know, listen, I didn't vote for this government, but I was in Nottingham the day after the election, and I was just chatting to a guy at the train station, and you know, he was really excited, and I said, did you see the results? And he said, yeah, let's see what Boris has got in store for us. And I really feel sorry for those people, actually, because how many prime ministers have we had in the past, 5, 6, 7 years? And they're not doing anything. So we're not actually talking about the issues, because we're talking about who gets to be in charge and run the Conservative Party. And we're just sick of it. Like, what are they doing? What are their policies? I don't know anything that they're talking about other than taxes, and if they think trans women are real women. I mean, really, is that the most important issue in the country?
Jake?
Well, look, the Northern Research Group, which I chair, which is the Northern MPs, Conservative MPs, many who won in that 2019 election with a mandate to level up the areas in which we live, we are trying to move this debate on to levelling up, and the communities that we represent, we have our feet very firmly planted. I have mine firmly planted in East Lancashire within our community, and that's why we've come up with the Northern Agenda Pledge, asking for a Northern Minister, asking for a fairer funding formula so we spend the equal amount of money across the UK.
But do you
a
think
huge focus on vocational
issues are being
education.
picked up and discussed
No, I
by
don't
the
think they are.
candidates
Absolutely not, and that's why we are pushing a formal pledge. If any of the candidates, as we start whittling them down, wants the support of the 80 Northern Conservative MPs, they're going to have to pick up on these issues, because we frankly want to hear about what any Prime Minister, whoever he or she may be, is going to deliver for our communities. Okay. I don't work for the Prime Minister. I work for the people of Rosendale and Darwen who send me to Parliament. So the questions I'm asking are, what are you going to do for my employers in East Lancashire? And that's where this contest needs to go.
Well, what have you done? You've been in power for 2 years, you know, and all we've heard about is Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson and the comings and goings and the gossiping and the backstabbing. I'm not actually aware of what the government... What has the government done?
For 12 years, they've been actually taking things away from ordinary working people, and they've actually been making things very difficult for people working in the National Health Service, for people working at the front line in the law, who do legal aid work, dismissed as being somehow below par. The horrible way in which people's wages have been stagnating for so many years. The Conservative government has failed for 12 years. It's not just been in the last couple of years. And unfortunately, the people who suffer are ordinary people.
Jake,
I'm not sure
the
greatest inflation-busting ever increase in the national living wage, taking the lowest paid in society out of tax. You know, I'm not sure that I would accept any of that.
OK.
I think we've got a record we can be proud of. After the show, I'll tell you all the things we've done for Rosendale and Darwin, because I'm quite proud of that as well. But let's not for now.
Well, as you say, at the moment, the conversation is very much in Westminster because it is Conservative MPs who are deciding who should go through to the final two in this contest. But then it will go to the Conservative Party membership around the country. And we can speak now to Patrick English from YouGov. And YouGov has been doing some work, Patrick, hello, on what the Conservative Party membership thinks. Tell us what you found.
Yes, we have indeed. We've been doing snap polling throughout the last couple of weeks, and the most recent snap poll we've done, which is almost 900 Conservative Party members, suggests that Penny Mordaunt is by far and away the clear favourite among the current membership of the Conservative Party to succeed Boris Johnson as leader and as Prime Minister. She wins on what we would call the generic long list, where we present all the candidates and ask the panelists to pick their favourite, and she comes out top there with 27%. But also, crucially, of course, as you mentioned, that is not the question which Conservative members will be asked come the summer. They'll be asked to go for a whittled down list of two. Just two candidates were presented to them. So we simulated that for our respondents, and we presented all of the candidates ran off against each other. And Penny Mordaunt, she wins in all 7 other head-to-head contests. She wins all of them handsomely. We're talking 20, 30, 40% margins over all of the rest of the contenders.
Right, so that was if it was Penny Mordaunt versus one other person, she would win each time, is what your polling's showing.
Absolutely, indeed. And she comes on top of that. Who would you most prefer list from all the candidates ranked together as well, yes.
How reliable is this polling? Because we know the membership is not 900 people, of course. It's, 100 and something plus thousand.
Yes, quite. Well, in much the same way that a national poll of 2,000 people can be representative and can predict accurately an election of sort of 65 million people, so we're able to take a sample of Conservative voters, very carefully constructed and modelled sample of Conservative members, and sort of extrapolate to the vote intention of the whole of the Conservative Party membership. Of course, all polling is subject to error, and this is just a snapshot of how the Conservative Party membership feel at this moment in time. But right now, it is quite clear from the data we're seeing that Penny Mordaunt is the front runner among the membership. But of course, she has to get there first.
She does indeed, Patrick. Thank you very much. And just talking of getting there then, so looking at the numbers, Jake, we know at the moment Rishi Sunak in the first round had the most backers, and then it was Penny Mordaunt. But it does feel there might be this sort of tussle for that second place on the ballot.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I actually personally think that this contest starts again on Monday, because over the weekend we're going to have 2 televised debates where people will see much more.
Well, we've got the voting today first, just to be clear. So
OK, but again, once the voting is through, there will be a list of candidates that go forward to the televised debates. We haven't heard enough from any of these candidates about what they're going to do for our country. That's why I'm really keen to get Tom Tugendhat there, because I think he will absolutely shine. But I want to hear from all of them. I want to hear more from Penny. I want to hear more from Kemi Badenoch. I want to hear more from Rishi Sunak and all the other contenders. And I think the contest, as I say, starts again on Monday, when we really know what these people are going to do. It's not about the set-piece launch speech. It's about when they're under real pressure, of interviews, how they're going to do. And I think if we were having that polling again on Monday morning, it might look very, very different.
Well, you were talking about set-piece launch speeches, and we did hear from Liz Truss today, Helena, and one of the things she was talking about was a sort of economic reset. She was talking about debt. She said the debt from COVID should be treated like the debt from the world wars, i.e. doesn't have to be repaid quickly, which gets more money in. Do you agree?
She's certainly right about that. But I do think that you have to hear from people about what brought about this terrible crisis, that we've actually had a scandal of the most incredible proportions where a Prime Minister has behaved so badly and in fact was enabled by people who were his aiders and abettors in the cabinet. And it's why I do hope that those who are going to be voting will take account of the fact that a whole lot of the candidates have also got a certain amount of responsibility for what took place. And that's why we do want to see a new reset from people people who were not complicit in the behaviour of Boris Johnson, forgiving him for his constant lying, for his enriching of his friends, of his the business of his behaviour with regard to women who were his mistresses and enriching them or getting them jobs and all of that.
Inaya, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to fundamentally change in the next week. I mean, for example, nobody would have expected Kemi Badenoch, who had not had a senior cabinet position, to be polling the levels that she is, because people are interested in having a different perspective, having a different kind of conversation. And we have to remember, Boris Johnson won an 80-seat majority, and that was not just a coincidence. It was because the British public wanted fundamental, radical change in this country for the economy to work in the interests of ordinary people, to have democracy and sovereignty. And I don't know if any of the candidates have been able to even come close to rising to some of those challenges. We have a cost of living crisis, strikes have been announced, there's lots of big changes that are going to happen to this country over the next few years, and I think that we have to go beyond just who speaks well, who looks prime ministerial,
well,
and
I mean,
so on.
Liz Truss today was trying to move it on to some policy when she's talking about tax cutting. A lot of the other contenders have talked about tax cutting, suggesting this idea of the COVID national debt.
It's not just about tax cuts. You know, we've got crippling inflation and energy crisis. We've got to have much more imaginative economic policy than that.
Paris, what have you made of it all as you've sort of watched this contest unfold?
I'm just so exhausted by all of it. I'm just literally so depressed. I don't want any of these people to be Prime Minister.
Is it depressed by the people or the nature of the debate? What is it?
The people, the nature of the debate, the fact that all of these, like you say, there were so many people that, you know, enabled Boris Johnson to be who he was. And now we're seeing all of these things coming out and these audios and things and all of this stuff that they were sitting on that they've used to bring him down. And it's like, well, why is this being released now? Why weren't we talking about this before? And it's just really depressing.
I mean, it really does matter that people suddenly, out of the blue, found their integrity.
Yeah.
Where was their integrity over the last period, where constantly the default position of our Prime Minister was to tell lies?
Jake?
Well, I think that's why you're seeing a real insurgency leadership election with people like Kemi, Tom Tugendhat, Penny, who weren't sat round the cabinet table, coming through so strongly. And that's why I think we've got to hear more from them, get them on that TV debate. It almost feels like, unlike any other Conservative leadership election I've seen, it feels like having been in the former cabinet is a disadvantage in terms of your ability.
Liz Truss today was talking about it as an advantage from a point of experience.
Yeah.
Does that make it hard?
Well, people say, you know, someone has to have been in the cabinet to be the Prime Minister. Well, Keir Starmer's never been in the cabinet, and I'm sure he will be telling people, I will disagree.
You advocating Keir Starmer as Prime Minister?
He will be telling people to vote for him because he will be a better PM. I think it suits people to say, look, if you've not been in the cabinet, you can't be PM. But that's why I'm backing Tom Tugendhat, because I actually genuinely believe that we need a fresh start, a clean start in the Conservative Party, and a new deal for Britain.
No one voted
we live
for a
in a
clean start,
country.
though. No one voted for a clean start.
We live in a country where the cards are stacked against you if you're born in the North of England, where the cards are stacked against you if you are a woman in many cases, and that's what I want to see change. I actually want to see the whole government change in its approach.
But don't you think that there's something wrong, that the membership in political parties has shrunk and the Conservative Party has a membership of only something like 300,000 people? Don't you think it's wrong that only in a democracy, that only 300,000 people get to decide who becomes the Prime Minister? Less than that, is it? Do you know how many it is? Less than that?
It's between 150 and 200,000.
I mean, that's shocking that the decision is going to be in the hands of so few, and affecting the whole of the United Kingdom. That is shocking. There should be a general election so that we can actually have a proper debate about what this country needs.
Very briefly, Jake.
Well,
Very briefly.
We've had enough of general elections. I certainly have for the moment. What I would say is, whether we like it or not, and maybe you like me would be trying to change the system, we don't live in a presidential system. We have political parties. Those parties elect the leader. I don't recall, but maybe you did, coming out and campaigning against Gordon Brown becoming Prime Minister without holding a general election.
I wanted him to have an election very quickly.
I don't recall.
There was a context to that. And yes, people are sick of general elections, but we're also sick of having Prime Ministers that we didn't vote for.
Exactly. Would Tom Tugendhat carry out the manifesto that the Tory party was voted on? Because his policy platform is a clean start when nobody voted for that. So would he continue
all
that?
of the candidates have said that they will continue to work into that manifesto. I'm quite pleased about that because there's things that I agreed with there, like not increasing taxes. So I'm quite looking forward to getting back to a Conservative Party manifesto and leaving behind some of the social liberal...
Very briefly, Henry, we must move on.
Where I agree with Aya is that the crises are so great just now. I mean, we're coming out of COVID. We've had the whole business of we're now going to... People are going to be, this autumn, having bills on their energy which are going to be monumental. There's going to be a serious crisis in living standards. There are going to be more strikes, let me tell you. There are just bound to be because people haven't got the money in their pockets. There's a serious set of crises facing us all, and I'm afraid it calls for something more substantial than what we're getting. 160 people deciding who becomes Prime Minister. That's not good enough.
Well, we will see. We will see today because, of course, we will have that shortlist. The results of the latest round of voting will be announced at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and then it will continue into next week. So we shall continue speaking about it, I have no doubt. But I want to speak now about Paris Lee's book that you've written, which is effectively a memoir of your childhood and your early years. It's called What It Feels Like... Thank you, you've got it with you, What It Feels Like for a Girl. And I think just reading the extracts from this, what really struck me is the description of what it was like in the place you lived in Hucknall, which is a town, am I right, in Nottinghamshire. You make it sound very bleak.
Well, it kind of was at that time. And I think, you know, with retrospect and, you know, being a bit older now and looking back, it's actually incredibly sad because I didn't realise, for instance, that my stepfather, who's in his 50s, and I've always known him to have worked in information technology, but his first job out of school was actually working down the pit, working down the mine. And he said that they'd all go down to the pub on Friday nights, and if they hurt their finger or something, they got sent home, and I think they got like 50 quid or something. So they always used to, you know, and there was a real sense of community, and you'd bump into people in the street. And I didn't realise growing up as a kid in the 90s and the noughties that actually it had a sense of civic pride, you know. I just knew it to be this really empty place where there weren't any opportunities, and it's literally one of those forgotten towns, and it's very much connected with Brexit. It's very much connected with a lot of these towns that, you know, were traditionally Labour going over to the Conservatives, and I've seen that in my family, and it's very interesting, and from my perspective disappointing really, but I think I understand why people are feeling so dissatisfied, and that's why it's so angry. It angers me to be talking about the Prime Minister because I just know it just undermines people's trust because they just think they're all the same.
Well, I'm interested in what you think. As you say, your family did that, did they? They switched from Labour to the Conservatives. Do you think that because of the conversation there has been since the Brexit referendum with the levelling up agenda, that towns like Hucknall, which you called forgotten, has that started to change? Well, I don't know if everybody in my family voted Tory. I don't know actually, but certainly that part of the country has gone that way. And I think it's because we were forgotten, and you know, maybe I was guilty of it slightly because I was really unhappy growing up, and all I wanted to do was escape and go to the city. And you know, I came to London, and I was living in my sort of, you know, media bubble, and I wasn't really thinking much about my hometown. And then the Brexit vote came in, and it was like, okay, I know who voted for that, and it was really the first time that I'd heard from those people in a long time, and now we're really hearing from them, you know. But I don't feel that they're getting what was promised. I don't understand how their lives are materially better now, you know. And I just see the rich getting richer and the poorer getting poorer. Nottingham's got some of the poorest, most deprived areas of the country. We are one of the most unequal developed countries, certainly in Europe. You know, it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I don't see this levelling up. I do not see it. I see people on the cover of the Mirror today having to use washing up liquid to wash their hair. You know, the crops are threatened in Italy at the moment because they've got the drought linked to the climate crisis. Okay.
No, hang on. And the harvest of fruit and vegetables could be damaged by 40%. This cost of living crisis is going to get worse. People literally can't feed themselves. And we're talking about all of this Westminster backstabbing and gossip. It drives me crazy.
Jake, I want to get your take on this because levelling up is something that you've talked a lot about with your Northern Research Group hat on. But Paris makes the point that it's just not happening.
Well, I mean, I grew up in a place like that. I was brought up in Liverpool in the 1980s, probably a little bit older than you, Paris, which was a very rough and violent city and was a city that had been forgotten by successive governments. Let's be absolutely clear about this. This isn't a Conservative or Labour problem. In the last 40 years, we have had 40 policies from governments of different hues to narrow the north-south divide and bring forward these forgotten towns. All of them have failed. You know, the north-south divide is bigger now than it was 40 years ago. In fact, the income disparity between the richest parts of the south and the poorest parts of the north is greater than between East and West Germany before the Berlin Wall fell down. And that's why the Northern Research Group is seeking to focus this leadership election on how we deliver that levelling up. We have done a lot. There are town deals, there are high street deals, there are levelling up bids which have succeeded, but it's not enough. And we want to hear from all of the candidates about how they're going to bring forward this agenda. Because actually the best way of tackling the cost of living crisis in places where I represent, like Rosendale and Darwin, or where I grew up in Liverpool, is to get more highly paid, secure jobs. Create economic growth in these areas so you can deal with a lot of the problems they face.
You are right that it's not just the Tories, it is Labour as well, and it has been going on for 40 years. But also, you know, we used to be able to get a doctor's appointment. You can't see your doctor now. You know, we used to have Sure Start centres. All of the, you know, services and the women's charities. You know, all of these things are being defunded. But there's always money, you know, to go out to lucrative contracts for friends of the Tories. You know, when it comes round to, you know, the PPE and it's just I'm really frustrated because I just don't see that people's lives are better.
Briefly, Anaya.
I think Paris is, you know, absolutely right. And I mean, one of the only candidates I've heard really talk about this is Kemi Badenoch in a Times article announcing her leadership. She talked about the problem of managed decline within this country, where there's just been plasters put over things. But it is a problem of both parties. On the one hand, you have the Labour Party who have not supported the strikes, which are ordinary people organising to demand better pay and conditions, really just effectively arguing that they want inflation-linked pay. Is that so much to ask? And then on... And didn't support.
Labour is talking about having a fair taxation system. When all this business about decreasing taxes, we know it will affect. It will affect wages. It will affect.
Labour have
consistently
schooling, demonised the National Health Service for expressing their agency. Whether that was Brexit or the strikes.
Corporate profits in the last 2 years have been the highest they've ever been. It's increased by 70%. Corporate profits.
I want to get to something else.
People in the north turn the back on the Labour Party. It's because the Labour Party has ignored them.
Jake, forgive me, please. I want to get to another point in Paris's book because
the health service was not in the state it's in just now under Labour.
I want to get to another element of your book, which is when you talk in quite deep, quite graphic detail, really, about the abuse that you suffered. It's hard to read, so I can only imagine what it must have been like to experience. Do you think that the debate around trans rights has changed enough, the way that people are treated?
I think it's getting worse and worse, to tell you the truth. I have one friend who has moved to France and doesn't want to come back here, and I certainly don't speak for all trans people, but I'm planning to leave. I don't want to be in this country.
You plan to leave the country?
I'm planning to leave, yes. I feel increasingly unwelcome and unsafe here. You know, we keep being told over and over again that it's of the utmost importance that we've got to keep having this debate about whether or not people like me should be respected, you know, whether I'm a real woman. No, you're not, because you can't have children, ha-ha. And we're told that this is absolutely essential to our democracy and our civilization. And I've just kind of come to the view, well, if that's what everybody's considering, like we just have to be unpleasant to trans people, then I'll just go to somewhere, a country that hasn't completely lost its mind on this issue and isn't in the grip of a moral panic and obsession with people like me.
Does anyone want to respond, Anaya?
You know, I think that's, you know, absolutely devastating to hear, and I'm really
sorry. Well, it's the truth. I'm not saying it for attention.
I 100% believe you. I mean, what I would say, though, is that, for example, before, effectively, the gender self-identification law was forwarded and pushed, no one, I don't think, actually mentioned the issue of the trans debate. I think Stonewall and other organisations took a policy of no debate and said that, for example, anyone could self-declare as a woman and therefore have access to women's spaces, rights and protections. And
sorry,
I think
I've got to jump in because it's not true. It's not true.
Can I just finish the point?
No, because I've got to shut down. That is not true.
I'm
sorry, but
let Kemi finish the point and I'll let you come back, Paris.
People who are not trans get to spread this misinformation every day in the media, every newspaper article. It is simply not true. When I transitioned over 10 years ago, I just walked into the female toilet and self-identified.
No, that's not what I said.
There is no change in policy. No, there isn't a change in policy.
You need to have one at a time, otherwise we can't hear
That's always been the de facto policy,
Paris,
so there hasn't been a change in policy.
Can we make your point?
If I was able to finish, then you'd understand that
You
that's not what I said.
Stonewall
I said
policy.
gender self-identification, the Gender Recognition Act, is a proposed law, something that's already going through in Scotland. That is a fact.
Right.
And that is what has caused the disagreement between feminists and other people who say that self-declaration merely allows people to be able to have access to
We already have self-declaration.
No, there is no.
What do you think happens when I go to a gender identity clinic and I say I feel that I'm female? I am declaring that I'm a female, and then a doctor may agree with me, and the passport office may agree with me, but I have declared who I am, and it's not because.
Are you saying
it's not
no
because
proposed
activists
changes in the
started?
Gender Recognition Act? The proposed change would get rid of the requirement for gender dysphoria.
They've had it in Ireland. They've had it in Scotland, and the sky hasn't fallen in.
That's not
there was a letter signed by Irish feminists saying we've had this.
Are you agreeing that there is a proposed change in law?
Which law? No, I want to understand your perspective. Which law, which policy in particular, do you feel is concerning people? What law changed? Tell me.
The Gender Recognition Act.
Because there's no laws around.
I'm sorry to rush you both, but we've got a lot to get through here, so please, one at a time. Briefly, Kemi, and then I do want to move on to another element, please.
It is the Gender Recognition Act, who currently, under the current system, people that want to transition have to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. The proposed change would get rid of that requirement and allow mere self-declaration that is already happening in Scotland. And I think the idea that it's only trans people who are the subject to abuse and vilification in this debate is just not true.
Is there any evidence it's caused problems in Scotland?
That's not the point. People in a democracy have a right to put forward their objections and that be argued out in the public sphere in an open way. And, well, I mean, many people...
What evidence is there that it's causing problems?
Can I please show you something that this issue has been discussed during the Conservative leadership race? I just want you to have a look at what some of the candidates have been saying about it. We can show you these clips now.
We need to get rid of all of this woke rubbish and actually get back to a country where describing a man and a woman in terms of biology does not mean that you're going to lose your job.
I'm a woman. I am biologically a woman. And I can tell you, Chris, that if you have been in the Royal Navy and you have competed physically against men, you understand the biological difference between men and women.
I will not be spending most of my time on these kind of issues. I think we owe everybody love and respect. People should be able to get on and live their lives. There's clearly a biological basis upon your birth, but when people want to transition gender, that is their choice, and they'll always have the support from me.
Grant Shapps, who obviously isn't standing anymore but was in the initial stages. Jake, what do you make of how this is being discussed within the context of the Conservative leadership contest?
I find the whole debate thoroughly depressing, actually, because, we have to understand that this is a subject which requires deep sensitivity, and we are talking about people, not, there isn't several types of people. We're talking about human beings, mothers, daughters, sons, brothers, sisters. And my only real experience of this, it is not an area in which I'm an expert, is a trans constituent of mine came to see me and he said, would you please stop talking about this from the extremes? The extreme of anti-trans, the extreme of trans activists. Because he said, all that happens to me is it makes my life impossible to live. And I think that moderate voice that says, actually, this isn't really an area in which the government should be active. It should be allowing, I believe in a smaller state, I believe we should allow people to be what they want to be, and it shouldn't be an area in which the government is stoking division. And I think actually quite a lot of the debate we're having is stoking division. I think that's deeply unfortunate.
Do you think some of your colleagues in this current
people must stand by what they say for themselves. I would really agree with what Grant Shapps says, that actually people need to be respected, they need to be free to make their own choice, and I just don't think it's an area in which the government should be seeking to control
public policy
lives.
Questions here that do need to be resolved?
Of course there are, but we need to really dial this debate down and have it in an understanding and sensitive way. There are difficult issues for society to grapple with and work out how we sort of all live together as human beings. But I just think it needs to be dialed down and people need to be treated with respect. It's not an area in which I'm an expert.
Can I let Helena?
I think it's disgraceful that it's being ramped up in this way. I did the first trans case in 1996 in the International Court of Justice, and it was about discrimination against trans people in employment. And it was accepted that the discrimination was at such a level that something had to be done about it. And many employment rights came through, sometimes international eyes being set on this and issues like this. And all I can tell you is that I have acted for quite a number of trans women. I haven't known any of them who have posed a threat to anybody at all. And so this business that somehow they're going to be predating on women if they're in prisons or if they're... It's just not... Those are risk management issues. And I really do feel that this is about discrimination, and it's being grabbed by the far right of the hard right of the Conservative Party, turning it into an issue.
I'm sorry to hurry you. I'm sorry to hurry you.
The gender critical feminists, Rosie Duffield, for example, in the Labour Party is hardly, you know, the far right of the Conservative Party.
Well, if they're being unpleasant to trans people, they're being unpleasant to trans people.
Woke all the time.
Hang on a minute.
I'm so sorry. Very briefly, we have a guest waiting on a different subject, so very briefly, please, Paris.
But the problem is that I've been told my entire life that my existence is a problem for other people, and I am so sick of only ever discussing. We are not talking about the violence and the discrimination that trans people face, because we're talking about all the potential problems that including people like me in society may or could cause. So that's why
I'm sorry, and we have
that's why I feel so upset.
Waiting. I'm so sorry to have rushed the debate. There's clearly something we could talk about longer, but we do have a guest waiting on something completely different, and we must go now to her. This is a story about the Welsh Parliament, which has decided to keep remote working measures, which were introduced during the COVID pandemic, but now they will stay in the Senedd for some time. And we can go to Heledd Fahan, who's a Plaid Cymru member of the Senedd. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you very much for your patience. Now, this is something you support, the idea of retaining remote working. Why is that?
Well, certainly, and it's not for those of us who are currently politicians, though we will benefit and have benefited. It's for all those people who don't currently consider politics as an option for them, if they have caring responsibilities, if they have disabilities, if they live a long distance away from the Senedd and don't want to be or can't be 3 or 4 nights per week away from their families. So this is about opening politics so that we have more people with lived experiences directing our policies and involved in our democracy.
Your Conservative colleagues say that Wales elects people to represent them in the Senedd, not to represent them from their sofa.
Well, that shows why there's a problem. If you don't acknowledge there's a problem, that we're not representative of Wales currently, then how are you going to tackle that? You know, we have regional and constituency offices, people join from those. And actually, I think it's ridiculous to think that you have to be in Cardiff to be able to represent, because you can also be there, you know, in your region, in your constituency, working alongside the communities you're elected to represent. And it's about making politics more attractive for more people so that we represent, you know, that we understand those that we represent and are able to put their views forward and that they're at the heart of decision making.
Heledd, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sorry that we kept you waiting, but appreciate your time. I just want to get your thoughts briefly on this in the last few minutes that we have. Remote working, good idea, bad idea, Jake?
Look, I think politicians have a leadership role to play. I think we need to show leadership to get Britain back to work. I think lots of the problems we have around passports and driving licences are to some extent linked to people working from home. What the Senedd does is a matter for the Senedd. But, however, here in Westminster, I'm very pleased to be back working hard in Parliament.
Helena?
And I do represent my community. That's what I do when I'm not in London.
Helena, briefly.
I'm a firm believer that being in the room with people is really important. And I think as a politician, you need to be. And what you can do is create all the sort of support systems that make it impossible for people with disabilities or people who've got children. You have to have all of that support there, but you really have to be in the room, because then you really do hear what other people are saying.
Paris?
I think there's a benefit to going in and taking your job seriously, you know, if they're running the country. But I do think that, you know, technology's changed and, you know, we can talk to people through the internet now. So, you know, working practices can evolve with that. And I would say I think we should all be working less. I think we should have a 4-day working week, and studies show that it makes people more productive. So I think we need a bit more flexibility and be working for the... Are we in the 21st century now?
We are, Anaya.
I think I'm stuck in the year 2000. But, yeah.
Anaya, what's your take?
I agree with what's being said. I mean, when you're making big decisions that affect everybody's lives, you want that to be in person, lots of discussion, lots of debate, and I don't think that could be fully done when everyone's on the laptop on their sofa.
4-day working week?
Don't mind. Why not?
Certainly sounds like an attractive proposition when the weather's so nice, isn't it? Thank you very much to all of my panel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Of course, that Conservative leadership race does continue. No doubt we will continue talking about it. I'll be back on Monday with more Politics Live. But for now, have a good afternoon. Goodbye.